Jack Turner had grown used to silence. It was the kind of silence that gnawed at your bones, that pressed against your ears until even your heartbeat seemed too loud. On this frozen island at the edge of the world, there was no chatter of neighbors, no hum of engines, no crackle of radios. Only the moaning wind, the groan of shifting ice, and the occasional snap of firewood as it burned. He hadn't chosen this life. Months ago, he had been part of a research crew on a vessel that had come to study the Arctic currents. A storm unlike any he had ever seen tore their ship apart. Waves as tall as buildings, winds screaming so fiercely they seemed alive. When the wreckage settled, Jack had washed ashore here, alone. Everyone else, friends, colleagues, shipmates, was gone. The sea had swallowed them whole. The first weeks had been pure survival. His hands cracked and bled from the cold. His stomach clawed at him until he figured out how to catch fish beneath the ice, how to set traps, how to keep a fire alive with driftwood that floated in from the ocean. Over time, the island became less of a prison and more of a grim teacher. He adapted. He learned its moods. And, in a way he couldn't explain, he felt the island was watching him back. It began with the lights. Faint at first, almost dismissible. Flickers of green and blue beneath the frozen sea. At night, when he walked along the shoreline, sometimes he would see the glow moving far below the ice, sliding like serpents trapped under glass. He told himself it was some natural phenomenon, bioluminescent algae, deep fish disturbed by currents. But deep down, he knew it was something else. Then came the sounds. The wind always carried strange voices across the snow, but these were different. Low hums, sometimes sharp clicks, sometimes something almost like words he couldn't decipher. Jack learned to shut them out, bury himself in work, focus only on survival. Until the footprints appeared. Small, delicate impressions in the snow. Not his own. Not shaped like boots. They were too narrow, too light, almost like a woman's bare feet. He followed them one morning, heart pounding, until they simply vanished at the edge of the cliffs. As if whoever made them had stepped straight into thin air. He tried to dismiss it all, tried to convince himself he was just going stir-crazy after so long in solitude. But that illusion shattered one stormy evening. The wind had been fierce, rattling his cabin walls, filling every crack with a mournful howl. Jack had been feeding the fire, when suddenly, he heard it. A thud. A body hitting the frozen ground outside. He grabbed the crude spear he had fashioned and stepped into the storm. Snow whipped at his face, nearly blinding him. But then, through the haze, he saw her. A figure collapsed near the shoreline, half buried in snow, her skin pale as porcelain, her hair dark and matted with ice. She was shivering violently, but alive. Jack's first thought was that she must be from another shipwreck, some poor survivor who had washed ashore like him. But when her lips parted and she whispered something, his world tilted. "Help me," she said, in perfect English. An American accent, clear and unmistakable. Jack dragged her inside, wrapped her in blankets, and set her near the fire. Her skin was cold as stone, her breaths shallow. He fed her broth, and slowly, color returned to her cheeks. Hours passed before she was strong enough to look at him clearly. "Who are you?" he asked cautiously. She hesitated, eyes darting to the window as if afraid something outside might hear. Then, with a voice both desperate and solemn, she said, "My name is Emily Carter. But you need to know. I'm not fully human." Jack blinked, convinced he had misheard. "Not human." Her lips trembled, but she held his gaze. "I was born here. Not on the surface, but below. There is a civilization beneath the frozen seas. Hidden, ancient, and dangerous. My people are not meant to walk among you. But I had no choice. I had to escape." Jack stared at her, his grip tightening around the spear. Was she delirious? Was this some madness brought on by hypothermia? But no, Her eyes burned with a strange conviction, and something in his gut told him she was not lying. Before he could press her further, the cabin shook. A low, rumbling groan echoed from the ice outside. Emily's face went pale. "They've found me," she whispered. Jack rushed to the window. Through the curtain of snow, he saw shapes moving in the distance. Tall, shadowy forms gliding across the ice with unnatural speed. Their bodies were elongated, their limbs too thin, their eyes glowing faintly like deep-sea creatures. They were coming straight for his cabin. "What the hell are they?" Jack demanded, heart hammering. Emily clutched his arm. "Hunters. They were sent to bring me back. If they take me, you'll never see daylight again." Jack's instincts screamed at him to push her out the door, to let them take her and leave him alone. But something inside, something human, stubborn, defiant, kept him rooted. He had survived storms, hunger, and loneliness. He wasn't about to surrender his only chance at company to monsters. He set his jaw. "Then we'll make them regret coming here." Emily's eyes widened, a mix of fear and hope. "You don't understand. These creatures, they don't stop. They don't bargain. They will tear this place apart stone by stone." "Then let them try," Jack growled. The night deepened, and the shadows outside drew closer. Emily pressed herself against the wall, whispering in a language Jack didn't recognize, soft, melodic, yet filled with sorrow. For a brief moment, the air in the cabin seemed to shimmer, as though reality itself bent around her words. Jack felt a strange warmth in his chest, like an invisible shield settling over him. "What did you just do?" he asked. "Something to buy us time," she said softly. "But it won't last." The first of the hunters stepped into view. Its body was tall and skeletal, its skin glistening like wet obsidian. Its eyes glowed a cold blue, piercing the night. When it opened its mouth, no sound came out, but Jack heard it anyway, inside his skull. "Return her." Jack gripped his spear tighter. "Not happening." The creature tilted its head, almost curiously. Then, without warning, it lunged. Jack shoved Emily behind him and thrust the spear forward. The tip struck the creature's chest, but instead of piercing, it ricocheted off with a metallic clang. The thing didn't even flinch. It swatted him aside effortlessly, sending him crashing into the wall. His vision blurred, his body screaming in pain. The hunter advanced, claws outstretched. But before it could reach Emily, she raised her hand and cried out in that strange language again. A burst of light exploded from her palm, striking the creature and hurling it backward into the snow. Jack gaped at her. "You can fight?" Her expression was grim. "I told you, I'm not like you. I carry some of their power. But using it, it makes them stronger too. They'll know exactly where we are now." As if on cue, more shadows emerged from the storm. At least half a dozen. Their glowing eyes formed a ring around the cabin. Emily's voice cracked. "We can't stay here. They'll burn this place to ash." Jack's mind raced. His cabin was the only home he had. The only shelter in this frozen wasteland. But one look at Emily's terrified face told him the truth. If they stayed, they were dead. He grabbed his pack, stuffed it with what little supplies he could, dried fish, a knife, spare matches, and slung it over his shoulder. Then he turned to Emily. "If we're leaving, we move now." Her eyes shimmered with both fear and gratitude. She reached for his hand. For the first time in months, Jack felt the warmth of another human touch. But outside, the hunters closed in. Their steps were soundless, their breath steaming in the night air. One of them raised its claw and dragged it across the cabin wall, leaving deep, burning scars in the wood. Emily whispered, "They won't stop. Not until one of us is gone." And with that, Jack pulled her into the blizzard. The storm clawed at Jack's face as he dragged Emily through the snow. The wind howled like a living thing, stinging his eyes, freezing his lungs with every breath. He knew the hunters were behind them, he didn't have to look back to feel their presence pressing against his spine. Emily stumbled beside him, clutching his hand with a desperate grip. She was light, almost too light, as if her bones were made of something more fragile than human. Her breaths came ragged, but she never begged him to stop. She knew as well as he did, stopping meant death. The ice stretched endlessly ahead, flat and merciless, broken only by jagged cliffs and black waters where the sea tore open the frozen crust. Jack led her toward a narrow ravine he had discovered weeks ago while searching for driftwood. It cut deep into the cliffs, hidden from the wind, a place even seals used to shelter. By the time they reached it, his legs burned and his lungs felt like fire. They collapsed against the icy wall, chests heaving, the storm muffling the world around them. For a brief moment, Jack thought maybe, just maybe, they had shaken their pursuers. But then came the sound. A low, resonant hum that vibrated through the ice beneath them, like the growl of some massive beast. Emily's eyes widened, and she pressed her back against the wall. "They're calling to each other," she whispered. "They hunt in harmony. They always know where the other is." Jack clenched his fists. "So we can't outrun them?" Her silence was the answer. The hum grew louder, and then, impossibly, a second sound joined it, a sharp, clicking rhythm, like the cracking of bones. Jack felt the hairs on his neck rise. He had heard that sound before, carried on the wind on nights when the stars vanished. But never this close. "They're closing in," Emily said, her voice breaking. Jack scanned the ravine desperately. He spotted a fissure in the wall, a narrow opening barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. He grabbed Emily's arm. "This way." The passage scraped their shoulders, forcing them into darkness. The air grew colder, the walls slick with ice. Jack's torch sputtered as he lit it, casting flickering shadows on the cavern walls. They stumbled deeper, the narrow passage twisting until it opened into a vast cavern hidden beneath the cliffs. Jack stopped dead. The cavern glowed. Not with firelight, not with anything natural, but with a strange luminescence that pulsed from the ice itself. Veins of blue and green light threaded through the walls like frozen lightning, stretching deep into the earth. The air felt heavy, alive, humming faintly as if the ice were breathing. Emily's shoulders sagged, her eyes softening. "I know this place," she whispered. Jack turned to her sharply. "What do you mean you know it?" Her gaze lingered on the glowing walls. "Because it's part of them. My people. This is their cradle. Their power runs through the ice like blood through veins. It sustains them. Protects them." Jack frowned. "And you?" She looked at him with an ache in her eyes. "It sustains me too." Before Jack could respond, the hum returned, louder, vibrating through the cavern. The hunters were close. He could feel their approach, like pressure building in his skull. Emily grabbed his hand, her skin warm despite the cold. "Listen to me, Jack. If they catch us here, they'll take me back beneath the sea. You can't fight them, not with your strength alone. But if we reach the heart of the cavern, I can awaken something. Something that might stop them." Jack stared at her. "Awaken what?" She hesitated. "A guardian. One of my kind. But it's dangerous. Once awakened, it cannot be controlled. It may see you as prey." The idea of unleashing something even worse than the hunters churned Jack's gut. But what choice did they have? He nodded grimly. "Then lead the way." They hurried deeper into the cavern, following the glowing veins of ice as they wound toward the earth's heart. The air thickened with energy, crackling faintly against Jack's skin. His torch sputtered and died, but it didn't matter, the glow from the ice lit their path. Behind them, the sound of the hunters grew sharper, echoing through the tunnels. They were closing in. At last, the passage opened into a vast chamber, larger than any cathedral Jack had ever seen. At its center lay a monolith of pure crystal, rising from the floor like a frozen pillar of light. Its surface shimmered with shifting patterns, symbols that danced like liquid before vanishing again. Emily stepped forward, her face pale but resolute. "This is it." Jack followed cautiously, spear in hand, though he knew it would be useless. "What do you have to do?" She turned to him, her eyes luminous in the cavern light. "Trust me." Then she pressed her palms against the crystal. The cavern roared to life. The veins in the walls blazed brighter, the ground trembling beneath their feet. The crystal pulsed, light surging up its length before bursting into the chamber like a rising sun. Jack shielded his eyes, teeth gritted, as the air thrummed with impossible energy. And then, it stirred. From within the crystal, a shape began to emerge. Not flesh, not stone, but something between. A figure taller than any human, its body woven from light and shadow, its eyes twin stars burning in the dark. It stepped free from the monolith, each movement heavy with power, the ground cracking beneath its weight. Jack's breath caught in his throat. "What is that?" Emily's voice trembled. "A sentinel. A protector from the old world. My ancestors created them to guard the deep. But they were buried, sealed away. I wasn't sure one would answer." The sentinel turned its blazing gaze on them. Jack felt his knees weaken, his instincts screaming at him to bow, to submit. But Emily stood firm, raising her chin. "I call you to protect," she said in her ancient tongue. "The hunters are near." The sentinel tilted its head, as if considering. Then it raised one massive arm, and the cavern shook with a sound like thunder. That was when the hunters arrived. They spilled into the chamber like shadows unbound, their bodies twisting unnaturally, their glowing eyes fixed on Emily. They hissed in unison, a sound that rattled Jack's skull. The sentinel moved. Its arm swept across the chamber with the force of a storm, slamming into the hunters and scattering them like leaves. The ground split beneath the blow, shards of ice flying in every direction. The hunters screeched, reforming, their bodies bending and stretching in grotesque shapes as they surged forward again. Jack watched in awe as the sentinel fought, its movements slow but devastating, each strike shaking the earth. The hunters leapt onto its limbs, clawing, tearing, but their attacks barely dented its radiant body. The cavern became a battlefield of light and shadow, the sentinel roaring, the hunters shrieking, the very ice groaning under the strain. Emily staggered, clutching her chest. Jack rushed to her side. "What's wrong?" Her face was pale, sweat beading on her forehead. "The sentinel, it draws from me. My blood, my strength. I don't know how long I can sustain it." Jack's stomach dropped. "If you collapse, then it dies with me." He gritted his teeth. They needed another plan. The sentinel was powerful, but if it drained Emily dry, the hunters would win by default. Jack scanned the chamber desperately, searching for anything, any weapon, any weakness. That was when he noticed it. The monolith. Its glow had dimmed since the sentinel emerged, but faint cracks now spidered across its surface. Energy still pulsed within it, unstable, volatile. Jack's mind raced. If the monolith was the source of the sentinel's power, maybe it could also be used against the hunters. Maybe, if shattered, it could release enough energy to obliterate them. But it could also bring the whole cavern down. He turned to Emily. "The crystal. If I break it, what happens?" Her eyes widened in horror. "No. It would collapse this place. The energy inside could tear everything apart." "Would it kill them?" Her silence was answer enough. The hunters swarmed the sentinel again, their claws piercing deeper this time, their shrieks growing louder. Emily swayed on her feet, her strength fading. Jack knew they didn't have long. He tightened his grip on the spear. "Stay with me," he said. Before she could protest, he sprinted toward the monolith. Jack's boots slammed against the ice as he sprinted across the cavern, every step echoing like a drumbeat. Behind him, the sentinel roared, its massive arms flinging hunters aside like broken twigs, yet the creatures returned again and again, relentless as waves. Emily cried out his name, but he didn't stop. The monolith loomed ahead, its surface fractured, light leaking through like fire through glass. Each pulse felt alive, as if the crystal itself were breathing, labored, furious, ready to burst. Jack knew this was madness. If he struck it, the energy inside could kill him before the hunters ever reached him. But he had learned one thing in this frozen wasteland: survival required risks. He raised his spear and slammed it against the monolith. The sound was deafening. A crack split across the surface, jagged and glowing. The cavern groaned as if the earth itself protested. Light poured out in blinding streams, and the air grew hot despite the surrounding ice. Emily's scream echoed through the chamber. "Jack, stop! You don't understand." The hunters froze mid-strike. Their glowing eyes shifted to Jack, wide and almost fearful. For the first time, they hesitated. That hesitation was enough to confirm his gamble: whatever lived inside this monolith was deadly even to them. Jack pulled back his spear for another strike. But a clawed hand seized it. One of the hunters had abandoned the sentinel and leapt across the cavern. Its cold, skeletal fingers gripped the spear with crushing force, its eyes blazing like twin suns. Jack growled and tried to wrench it free, but the creature was impossibly strong. Then Emily's voice rose again, not in English, but in that strange, melodic tongue. Her words cut through the cavern like bells rung in a cathedral. The hunter recoiled, screeching, its grip faltering. Jack twisted the spear and drove its jagged end into the crack. The monolith shattered. A torrent of light exploded outward, a storm of raw energy that engulfed the cavern. Jack was thrown backward, his body slamming into the icy floor. His vision blurred, his ears rang with a piercing tone. For a moment, he thought he was dead. But then, he opened his eyes. The cavern was chaos. The sentinel had collapsed, its radiant form dissolving into sparks. The hunters writhed in the light, their bodies twisting and tearing apart, their screeches piercing as they disintegrated into ash. The veins in the walls flared bright enough to blind, then went dark, leaving only silence in their wake. Jack coughed, forcing himself onto his elbows. The air stank of ozone, sharp and metallic. Shards of crystal littered the floor, glowing faintly like dying embers. And then he saw her. Emily lay crumpled near the remains of the monolith, her chest rising shallowly. Jack staggered to her side, heart pounding. "Emily. Hey. Stay with me." Her eyes fluttered open, glowing faintly with that same eerie light. She gave him a weak smile. You did it." He shook his head, furious at her frailty. "We did it. Come on, you're not dying here." She laughed softly, though it ended in a cough. "It's not that simple. The monolith was part of me. Destroying it took something from me too." Jack gripped her hand tightly. "Then I'll carry you until we find a way to fix it. I'm not leaving you here." Her fingers curled weakly around his. "You're stubborn, Jack Turner." He almost laughed, but his chest was too tight. The cavern had fallen silent. No hum. No glow. No hunters. For the first time since she appeared on his shore, the island felt empty again. Yet Jack knew it wouldn't last. The hunters weren't the only ones. If Emily had escaped from an entire civilization beneath the sea, there would be more. And they would come looking. He helped her to her feet, her body trembling against him, and together they stumbled back through the cavern. The fissure walls closed around them, the glow behind them fading until only darkness remained. When they emerged into the storm once more, Jack tilted his head back, letting the snow sting his face. The cold was harsh, but real. For the first time, he welcomed it. Emily leaned into him, her breath shallow. They'll send more, she whispered. They'll never stop. Not until I'm back below. Jack clenched his jaw. Then we'll keep moving. We'll find a way to end this. She looked at him, her eyes soft and searching. You'd risk everything. For me. Jack hesitated only a moment. You're the first living soul I've seen in months. You could have been anything, a monster, a liar, but instead, you trusted me. That's enough. Her lips trembled as though she wanted to say more, but exhaustion won. She rested her head against his shoulder, and Jack tightened his arm around her, guiding her through the blizzard. Hours passed before they reached the shoreline. Jack's cabin was still standing, scarred and battered, but intact. He brought Emily inside, rekindled the fire, and wrapped her in blankets once more. She drifted into sleep almost instantly, her chest rising and falling in a fragile rhythm. Jack sat beside her, staring into the flames. His body ached, his mind reeled. He had shattered an ancient relic, unleashed power he didn't understand, and nearly died doing it. Yet, for all the madness of the night, one truth cut through clearly: he wasn't alone anymore. The wind howled outside, rattling the cabin walls. Jack reached for his spear, laying it within arm's reach. He knew this wasn't the end. The hunters would come again. But this time, he wouldn't face them alone. And as he closed his eyes, exhaustion finally pulling him under, he wondered what fate awaited them both, man and half-human, stranded together at the edge of the world. When Jack woke the next morning, the fire had burned down to glowing embers. Emily was still asleep, her face pale, her breathing steady but shallow. For a long while, he simply sat there, listening to the crackle of the coals and the endless wind outside. His mind replayed the night's madness in vivid fragments: the hunters, the sentinel, the explosion of light when the monolith shattered. Part of him wondered if it had been nothing more than a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by hunger and exhaustion. But when he looked at Emily, wrapped in his blankets, her face half-human and yet touched with something unearthly, he knew it was all real. Jack stood slowly, stretched the stiffness out of his limbs, and stepped outside. The morning was gray, the sky heavy with snow clouds. The storm had quieted, but the island felt changed somehow, emptier, heavier, as though the destruction of the monolith had torn something loose from the world itself. At the shoreline, he paused. The ice stretched out endlessly, broken only by black fractures where the sea swirled below. He crouched near one such fissure, staring down into the water. And then, he saw them. Shapes moving far beneath the surface. Dozens of them. Gliding too smoothly to be fish, too coordinated to be random. Their glowing eyes flickered faintly in the dark water, watching him from below. Jack swallowed hard and backed away. When he returned to the cabin, Emily was awake. She sat near the fire, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She looked fragile, almost breakable, yet when her gaze met his, there was steel in her eyes. "They're coming, aren't they?" she said softly. Jack nodded. "I saw them. In the water. More of them." Emily closed her eyes, her jaw tight. "Then we don't have much time." Jack sat opposite her. "You need to tell me everything. No more half-truths. If I'm going to fight for you, I need to know what I'm up against." For a long moment, she was silent, as if weighing how much to reveal. Finally, she spoke. "My people live beneath the ice, in a world hidden from yours. We are older than any human nation, older than your history. We were born in the deep, shaped by pressure and darkness, nurtured by the energy of the ice itself. To the surface, we are myths. To us, you are intruders. We are not meant to coexist." Jack frowned. "And you? You speak English. You look human. Why?" Her lips curved in a sad smile. "Because I'm not fully one of them. My mother was human. She was taken from a ship that vanished in these waters decades ago. My father, He was one of the deep ones. I am the result of their union. A half-blood. Jack blinked, trying to absorb it. So you're living proof that your people and mine aren't so different. Her eyes darkened. To them, I'm proof of something shameful. An abomination. That is why I ran. They would not allow me to live free. They would bind me, control me, use me as a tool to bridge your world and theirs. That is why the hunters came. That is why they will always come. Jack's fists clenched. Then we'll make them stop. Emily shook her head. You don't understand. The hunters are only the beginning. If I remain above, they'll send more powerful ones. Leaders. My father among them. The word struck Jack like a blow. Your father. Her voice was barely a whisper. He is a warlord of the deep. One who believes our kind should rise, should conquer the surface. If he finds me, he'll use me to wage that war. And nothing in your world will survive. Silence fell between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Jack leaned forward, his voice low but steady. Then we don't let him find you. We fight. We run. Whatever it takes. You're not going back down there. Emily's eyes shimmered with something unspoken, fear, gratitude, maybe even hope. She reached out, her fingers brushing his. You don't know what you're saying. You don't know the cost. Jack held her gaze. I've lost everything already. My ship. My crew. My life. If fighting for you gives me a reason to keep going, then it's worth it. Her breath caught, and she turned away, blinking quickly. The hours that followed were filled with preparation. Jack packed what supplies he had left, dried fish, knives, spare furs. He reinforced the cabin door with heavy driftwood planks, though he doubted it would matter. And all the while, he felt the eyes beneath the ice, watching, waiting. That night, the world changed again. Jack woke to a sound unlike any he had heard before. A deep, resonant song, rising from the sea itself. It vibrated through the cabin walls, rattling the windows, sinking into his bones. He stumbled outside, his breath fogging in the cold, and froze. The horizon glowed. A faint blue light pulsed beneath the ice, spreading outward like veins across the sea. It moved with rhythm, like a heartbeat, growing brighter, stronger. And then, shapes emerged from the water. They rose slowly, impossibly tall, their bodies cloaked in robes of shimmering scales. Their faces were partly human, partly alien, with wide, luminous eyes that glowed in the dark. They stood on the ice as if it were solid ground, their presence heavy, commanding. Emily stepped outside behind him. When she saw them, her face went white. Counselors, she whispered. Jack's grip tightened on his spear. Counselors. They are not hunters, she said, trembling. They are leaders. Judges. If they've come, then my father won't be far behind. As if summoned by her words, the sea split open. From the black waters rose a figure larger than the rest, towering, armored in plates of living coral. His eyes glowed brighter than all the others, his face sharp, proud, cruel. When he spoke, his voice rolled like thunder across the ice. Daughter. Emily's breath hitched. Her knees buckled, and Jack caught her before she fell. Her father's gaze fell on Jack then, piercing, hateful. You shelter what is mine, the warlord rumbled. Release her, and I may let you live. Jack stood tall, though his heart pounded like a drum. She's not yours. She's not anyone's. The warlord's expression darkened, and the ice cracked beneath his feet. Then you will die screaming. Emily clutched Jack's arm, her voice urgent. We can't fight him here. He draws strength from the sea. We need to move inland, far from the ice. Jack nodded grimly. Then we run. And as the warlord raised his arm and the counselors began their dreadful song, Jack pulled Emily into the storm once more, the frozen wasteland stretching ahead, the fate of both their worlds now chasing at their heels. The snowstorm swallowed them as they fled inland, leaving the glowing figures of the counselors and the warlord behind on the ice. Jack forced his legs to keep moving, half carrying Emily through drifts that reached his knees. Each gust of wind tore at his furs, each breath seared his chest, but he didn't dare slow down. Behind them, the sea sang. The counselors' voices carried through the storm, rising in haunting harmony, vibrating through the very ground. It felt less like sound and more like a command, something meant to weaken the will, to drive prey into submission. Jack clenched his teeth, focusing on the snow beneath his feet, refusing to let it break him. Hours passed. The shoreline fell away, replaced by jagged cliffs and frozen ridges. Jack knew these paths well, he had scouted them during his long months of solitude, searching for food and firewood. He led Emily toward one place in particular, a cave hidden high in the cliffs, shielded from the wind, a place he had once used as shelter. By the time they reached it, dawn was breaking. The sky glowed pale gray, the storm easing. Jack guided Emily inside and laid her down against the stone. She was shivering violently, her face pale, her breath shallow. He built a fire quickly, coaxing the flames to life, and pressed her close to the warmth. For a long time, neither spoke. The only sounds were the crackle of fire and the distant, bone-deep hum of the counselor's song still drifting faintly from the sea. Finally, Emily broke the silence. "You shouldn't have come with me." Jack looked at her sharply. "And let you face them alone?" "Not a chance." Her lips trembled, not from the cold but from something deeper. "You don't understand, Jack. If my father finds me, if he binds me to him, he will use me as a bridge. A link between his world and yours. Through me, he will tear down the barrier that separates the deep from the surface. He will unleash war." Jack leaned closer, his voice firm. "Then we don't let him. We stop him." Her eyes glistened in the firelight. "You talk as if it's simple. But you've seen the hunters. You've seen the sentinel. My father is far beyond them. He carries the strength of ages. He is tied to the ice, to the sea. On the water, he cannot be defeated." Jack frowned. "Then we make him fight where he's weakest. Away from the sea. Here, on land." Emily blinked, startled. For the first time, a flicker of hope crossed her face. "You would challenge him here? You would risk that?" Jack's jaw tightened. "I've risked everything since the storm wrecked my ship. I've had nothing but this island, nothing but silence. And then you came. For the first time in months, I don't feel dead inside. So yes, I'll risk everything." Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. "You are either very brave, Jack Turner, or very foolish." "Maybe both," he said with a grim smile. They spent the day preparing. Jack scouted the cliffs, searching for defensible ground. He found a narrow ridge where the path narrowed to a bottleneck, a place where a giant like Emily's father would be forced to fight head-on. He sharpened his spear, reinforced it with iron scraps salvaged from the wreck of his ship months ago. It was crude, but it was all he had. Emily, meanwhile, gathered her strength. She sat cross-legged near the fire, whispering in her strange tongue, drawing faint lines in the stone with her fingertip. Each mark glowed briefly before fading, leaving behind a sense of warmth in the air. When Jack asked what she was doing, she said simply, "Preparing protections. They won't hold him long, but they may buy us time." As night fell, the hum of the counselors grew louder again, closer now, echoing through the cliffs. The warlord had found their trail. Emily rose slowly, her face pale but resolute. "They're coming." Jack gripped his spear and took his place at the ridge. The wind whipped around them, carrying the distant glow of blue light as the counselors approached. Their figures loomed against the snow, tall and solemn, their voices weaving together into a song that made the very stones tremble. And then he appeared. The warlord stepped onto the ridge, his massive form towering against the storm. His coral armor shimmered with wet light, his glowing eyes locked on Emily. He carried no weapon, he was weapon enough. "Daughter," he thundered, his voice shaking snow from the cliffs. "You cannot run from me. You belong to the deep. Return, and I may yet spare this man's life." Emily stepped forward, her chin raised though her hands trembled. "I will never return. I will never be your bridge." The warlord's expression hardened. "Then you are nothing." He raised his hand, and the counselor's song swelled. The air thickened, heavy with energy. Jack's bones ached from the vibration, his vision swimming. He stumbled, but Emily cried out in her ancient tongue, and the lines she had drawn in the stone flared to life. The air around them shimmered, the crushing weight easing. Jack regained his balance, raising his spear. "You'll have to go through me." The warlord tilted his head, studying him as one might study an insect. "So be it." He lunged forward, faster than anything that size should move. Jack braced himself as the ground shook beneath the impact. He thrust his spear upward, the iron tip grazing the warlord's chest but failing to pierce the coral armor. The force of the blow sent Jack sprawling, his weapon nearly torn from his hands. Emily shouted something, and a burst of light erupted between them, forcing the warlord back a step. For the first time, surprise flickered in his eyes. "You dare use my blood against me?" he growled. Emily's voice was steady, though her face was pale. "It is not your blood. It is mine." The battle had begun. The ridge trembled under the weight of the warlord's fury. His towering form surged forward again, his coral armor scraping sparks against the cliff face as he swung a massive hand toward Jack. The blow could have shattered bones, but Jack rolled aside at the last moment, snow exploding where he had been. Jack scrambled to his feet, his breath burning in his lungs. His spear shook in his hands, but he tightened his grip, refusing to let it go. Emily's voice rose behind him, strong despite the strain. She was chanting in that strange language again, her words carrying power. The faint lines she had carved into the cliff walls pulsed with light, forming a barrier that shimmered like glass between them and the counselors. Their song pressed against it, their faces impassive, as if watching a ritual rather than a battle. The warlord bared his teeth, his glowing eyes fixed on Emily. "Your tricks will not save you." He lunged again, his speed unnatural, and Jack stepped in his path. He thrust his spear upward, not at the chest this time but at the gaps in the coral plating along the warlord's side. The iron tip sank in shallowly, drawing a hiss that was part pain, part rage. The warlord backhanded Jack with a force that sent him crashing into the rocks. His vision flared white, his ribs screaming in agony. He coughed, tasting blood, but forced himself up again. He wouldn't stay down. Not now. Emily's chant reached a peak, her eyes glowing faintly with the same blue light as the hunter's. A ring of symbols flared around her feet, pulsing with power. She raised her hand, and the ground beneath the warlord cracked, fissures of light spreading outward like a net. The warlord roared, fighting against the bindings, his strength shattering stone with every movement. But for a moment, just a moment, he was held. Jack staggered forward, gripping his spear with both hands. He aimed for the wound he had already made, for that tiny gap in the coral armor. With a roar of his own, he drove the weapon forward with every ounce of strength he had left. The spear struck true. The iron tip punched deeper this time, tearing through flesh, sinking until the shaft quivered in his hands. The warlord's roar shook the ridge, a sound of pain and fury that echoed across the cliffs. He ripped the spear from his side and snapped it like a twig, but blood spilled freely now, glowing faintly blue against the snow. Emily raised both hands, her chant transforming into a scream of defiance. The fissures of light surged upward, wrapping around her father like chains, pulling him to his knees. His strength faltered, his glow dimming. Jack, battered and bleeding, staggered to Emily's side. Together, they faced him. "You cannot sever what is bound," the warlord snarled, his voice weaker now but still laced with venom. "She is mine. Through her, the deep will rise." Emily's voice shook, but her words were firm. "No. I choose my own path. And I choose the surface. I choose freedom." The chains of light tightened. The warlord let out one final roar, then collapsed to the ground. His massive form crumbled, the coral armor shattering into fragments that scattered across the snow like broken shells. The glow faded from his eyes. Silence followed. The counselor's song ceased. They stood at the edge of the ridge, their faces unreadable, their glowing eyes fixed on Emily. For a long moment, Jack thought they would advance, that the battle wasn't over. But then, slowly, they bowed their heads. Without a word, they turned and melted back into the storm, their lights fading into the distance until nothing remained but the howl of the wind. Emily collapsed to her knees, trembling, her strength spent. Jack caught her before she fell completely, holding her close. "It's over," he whispered, though part of him still couldn't believe it. She looked up at him, her eyes soft, filled with exhaustion and something else, something like hope. "It's over, because of you." Jack shook his head. "Because of us." They stayed like that for a long while, the fire dying low, the storm finally easing into calm. When dawn broke fully, the world seemed transformed. The cliffs gleamed in pale gold, the sea below calm and endless. For the first time since his shipwreck, Jack felt the weight of despair lift from his chest. He turned to Emily. "What happens now?" She smiled faintly, though her eyes were sad. "I can't return to the deep. I've severed that tie. But I don't know how to live up here." "Not yet." Jack squeezed her hand. "Then we'll figure it out. Together." For the first time, Emily laughed. It was soft, fragile, but real. And so they began the long walk back toward the cabin, two survivors, bound not by blood, but by choice. The hunters were gone, the warlord defeated, and though the frozen island was still harsh and unforgiving, it no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a beginning.